Well, today we're in Psalm 128, and it's a great psalm. He begins by saying, Blessed, and just let me pause here for a moment. The idea of blessed means that a man is favored, he's fortunate. The Greeks would refer to a man that's blessed, that was wealthy, had good health, and so he would be happy. But I want you to understand something. Happiness oftentimes is determined on outward circumstances, and often it's temporary. So the emphasis upon a man who is blessed, especially blessed of God, means that he's very fortunate. And here's what he has to say. And let me just mention in passing that this idea of blessing, this well-being, this good welfare in the best sense of the word, is important to understand here in an experience kind of way, not academic. We're not looking for any kind of a definition of blessed, but here's a man who experiences in life blessedness. As you see the man, he's highly favored by God. So we're going to see in the psalm what it means to be blessed. And let's go ahead and look at it just very briefly today. He says here, Blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord. Now notice the man who's blessed is the man who fears the Lord. Now in one sense, the word fear is used of being afraid or terrified. The idea of being intimidated. That's not the idea here. But I will say this, that sometimes the fear of God has vanished from our modern world. And there's a sense in which we ought to fear God because he is the judge and he's the one who's able to send both body and soul into hell. I know that's not popular, and neither is the wrath of God. But when you think about it, the wrath of God is a wonderful thing because he's against wrong, and he's against hurtful things and bad things. But that's not the sense of the word here, but I needed to throw it out to you because I think it's important that one fears God if he is not living for God, that he is the judge who can send someone into a terrible place. Let's just be kind of nice about that. Now, here the idea, and I want to stress this point too, the idea of fearing the Lord, and it's also very rare anymore, is the idea of having reverence and deep respect for God. That ought to be, you see, witnessed in our worship assemblies and in our individual lives, that we have a reverence for God. And by the way, in our society today, we're showing a lack of reverence and respect even to our leaders, which is not a good thing. Now, notice he'll say, and I wanted to get to this very quickly, here's what you see about the man who's blessed, or what it means to be blessed of God. Notice in the first place, he'll say, he shall eat of his labor. He's referring to his work. Now, back in those days, sometimes you see invading armies would come in, or marauders, and come in and steal the crops, or the crops would fail because of disease. And here he's saying the man who is favored and blessed of God, the man who reverences him, will eat of his labor. He'll be successful in his work, and happy shall he be. Now you see, objectively, there's the labor and the harvest, and it goes well. And so obviously you're going to be happy. I want you to try to understand what I'm trying to say. Happiness, which is oftentimes looked at subjectively, here the idea, it is a subjective happiness based upon an objective truth. Think on that. Now, what he says here in verse 3 is that his home will be blessed. Notice, the wife shall be a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house, and the children like olive plants around thy table. In other words, he's saying you're blessed because you have family and you have children, and the children are a blessing. The Lord shall bless thee out of Zion, verse number 5, and shall see the good in Jerusalem all the days of his life. Now I want you to notice the third thing, what it means to be blessed, and that is to have long life. That's what he says in verse number 6. And thou shalt see thy children's children. That's your grandchildren, and the peace upon Israel. Now, what does it mean to be blessed? Well, it means you're favored of God. And here in this context, there's three things that he says. Number one, he says that your labor and your work will be successful. And number two, that you'll have a good home and you'll see your wife will bear children and you'll have family. And then number three, notice he says, and you will have long life. That we ought to reverence the Lord and have a deep respect for him and demonstrate that in our life, in our words, in our conduct, and in our worship. Something to think on, isn't it? Hey, we'll see you next week and we'll continue in our study, Psalm 129. See you then.